You ask Kathy or anybody who's close to me when those things come up, my initial reaction is, they're done. You blew it. I'm sorry. It's over. Because that's my initial thing. Because it is, when people abuse their positions of authority in the church, that's highly offensive to me. Because I see how much damage that has done to the church.
Yes.
That's what I mean. It has to begin with forgiveness for me.
Yeah.
Because that's not my first reaction. My first reaction is, you're done.
Yeah.
So it has to begin with forgiveness for me. And then kind of, again, working through that process and find out where their heart is at.
Welcome back to the Fight for Your City podcast. And I wanted to start this episode with saying thank you to everyone who's been watching up to this point, because we finally hit our goal of hitting 1,000 subscribers. Now I'm making my way toward our next goal, which is 1,000 watch hours so this channel can be fully monetized. So I would encourage you, if you haven't watched all of our interviews yet, please do that, because me and my wife Emma would very much appreciate all the time that I'm pouring into this and all the time that I'm not at home doing a lot of the stuff that I'm supposed to do with Emma. So we'd both appreciate y'all to continue to watch this whole episode, and thank y'all for your support. And now, as kind of celebration, I'm getting to interview the guest that I've been most excited to meet and to interview, which would be my own parents, Josh and Kathy Carpenter, who help pastor Grace United Church in Paragould, Arkansas, my hometown. Thank y'all for making the drive to be here.
Absolutely.
As we get started, I just wanted to ask, could y'all give us a brief introduction about like your backgrounds in the church and how you got to where you're at right now?
Sure. So we've been at Grace United, Kathy and I, for 12 years. This will be our 12th year in June. And we've pastored churches here in Indiana and Missouri, and then finally in Arkansas. So we've been married for 28 years yet. 28 years.
I was going to say 28.
28 years this year. We've been talking about the 30th, so that's why I jumped to that. And so we've been in ministry our entire marriage, really my entire adult life. So it's just been who we are since we've been together.
Okay. And people who don't know our family super well, I'm a fourth generation pastor, which makes you a third generation. Right. So what was that experience like growing up with, to you, Dad, to me, Pawpaw, to other people, Pastor Marston, Pastor Carpenter? What was it like to grow up in that kind of environment?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's the only life I ever knew. My dad started pastoring just a couple of years before I was born. And it's shaped my life in a lot of ways. Again, not knowing anything different. Always being in church. I always tell folks there's never been a time that I didn't know that Jesus loved me.
Yeah.
I explained it to a guy I grew up with not too long ago, how blessed we were. And this is true for me, and I think for Kathy would say the same thing. We're blessed to kind of be born on third base when it comes to faith, because we're surrounded by people who worship Jesus, believed in Jesus, served Jesus in the church faithfully. So that shaped our lives and set us up well to be able to not just love Jesus and know Jesus, but to serve him through the church as well.
And Mom, what was your background growing up in church? Because you grew up in the same kind of town area as Dad, went to the same school as Dad, but you also spent your whole life growing up in church as well, just in a different environment, we'll say.
So I grew up Pentecostal, and then in my preteen years, we went to a non-denominational church. And then when I hit probably 17, my parents were kind of in between the churches that they were attending. And so at that point, I started going with your dad to a General Baptist church, and that's where I've gone ever since.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's interesting. Like, it was definitely your background more charismatic, but still had a lot of like some of the same theological roots in a way, just not in like, obviously like how a service would look, I guess you could say, right. But it was still there. So, Mom, what was your reaction when Dad decided to kind of step into Grandpa's shoes and say, I'm going to accept the call into ministry? Was it positive?
Probably not.
It wasn't? Because at the time, Dad is going to ASU for a business degree.
And then was going to go to law school.
And was going to go to law school.
Yes.
Yeah. And so he accepts a call into ministry. What was those conversations? Did he tell you before he did it?
That Sunday, he grabbed my hand and said that he wanted to go to the altar, that he felt like that was his call. And I said, let's just wait and go home and talk about it. But he didn't give me that option. And so our lives forever changed that day.
Man. So, Dad, you accept the call. I think you said it was 19 years old.
Right.
And you kind of make, I guess what some people would say, it was kind of a rash decision that that you were a semester away from graduating with business degree from Arkansas State University.
Mm-hmm.
And you get in contact with, which is the General Baptist College, Oakland City. Mm-hmm. And you decide to go there to go start a new bachelor's degree instead of a master's degree.
Right. What
made you decide to do that? Because the route most people would have goes just finish your bachelor's degree and go into a master's, an MDiv.
Yeah. So that whole story, my dad was a bivocational pastor his entire ministry up until really he retired from the factory he worked at and began to do full-time ministry then. And honestly, I didn't know anything different. I didn't know there was such a thing as full-time ministry. And our pastor at Rector General Baptist Church talked to me about it and let me know, this is something that's not just a calling, but it can be a career for you. And that is where I first got in contact with Oakland City University. So that was their first recommendation. It was finish your bachelor's degree, come here and start your MDiv and do a master's degree. And that was kind of our plan. And we were both working. I was working 2 jobs and going to school at ASU. I don't remember how many jobs you had at that time, 2 or 3 jobs. Kathy worked 3 jobs for a while. And we were just kind of going through life. We were really having a good time. But we felt like this urgency to go. And I remember coming home one night and we were sitting in our apartment. We were like, we're just ready to go. We're ready for a change, ready to move, to do what we know we're supposed to be doing. And so kind of against the advice of much wiser people, we're going. And I remember calling Dr. Orr Johnson at the university, who was the vice president there, and told him what I wanted to do. And he says, well, we'll make it happen.
Yeah.
And the next week he called and said, I've got you a church.
Man.
And they've got a house for you. And we made our first trip to Indiana to go check it all out. And it was really an amazing time in our lives. Really, for the next probably 5 years, things kind of worked that way.
So what was it like? Because some people who are watching, the idea of I accepted the call into ministry at 19, I'm going to go start my bachelor's degree to go to be a pastor. It'd be wild for some people to think of, we have a church for you. So what was that daunting to think like, I'm going to go pastor a church?
Well, no, by that point we were 21 and yeah, I mean, at 21, you think you could do anything. So I thought I was ready to, charge hell with a water pistol, as they say. So I was just excited for the opportunity. I didn't think about whether I was prepared or not. And the church I went to was in Cato, Indiana. So there'll be folks around here actually know where that's at. And a little church that sits up on the hill there. And at that time, that was essentially that church's ministry, was to give pastoral students a place to preach and to practice the craft. And that church took care of us. I always joke that our youth group in that church was in their 60s. Most people in that church were in their 70s and 80s. It was a church, maybe about 50 people. We were 21, 22 years old. They treated us like their grandkids most of the time, and just took care of us and gave us the opportunity to minister to them and minister to that community. And we had a great time we were only there for a couple of years, and I learned a lot and made some good connections there, and it was a good time for us and just what we needed at that point in our life.
So you kind of go through what's kind of, at least in our circles, a pretty normal journey for a pastorate, where you start off at a small church while you're going through your education. You move to a church called South Canaan. And was it in Holcomb, Missouri? Is that where the church was? Or
it's between Holcomb and Campbell. Yeah, so, actually at a town called Gibson.
Okay. So. And it was in the sticks. Like it was cornfields on every side. Yeah. And so you kind of go from there. You go to, at the time, Dexter, which was Second General Baptist Church. And while you're there, they rebrand to Risen Church, where they're still known as today. And then you make the decision to go to Grace United, where you're at today. So You might want to talk to that for a moment. What's it like going through that experience where instead of kind of the style that it is today, especially within larger church culture, you kind of take on a smaller ministry role and you kind of work your way up the church, or you kind of have a lesser role, then you go to a church with a slightly more important role or a higher role until maybe you plant a church or take on a lead pastor role. But you're actually going from almost lead pastor role to lead pastor role, except I think you were a youth pastor at one point
Right.
in that.
I was a youth and outreach pastor at Princeton.
Church on the Hill or General Baptist Church, whatever people around here know it as.
Right. And so, but yeah, besides that, kind of the solo pastor, lead pastor role has been what I've done, except for my time there at Princeton.
Mm-hmm. So what's it like then going from leading one church to leading another church? Because I imagine you're growing a lot in between all of that. But what would you say was like kind of the biggest like growth moment in the midst of all that, where you're going to another church and you're saying, okay, I know to do more of this, or I know to not do this next time?
Right. So probably the one of the biggest jumps for us ministry wise was probably when we moved from South Canaan to Dexter, which was Second General Baptist Church in Dexter at that point. Part of that, I mean, if you just think the context of things, in which we grew up in rural areas. I grew up in Marmaduke, Arkansas, which is 1,000 people. Kathy grew up in Leif, which was 300 people. Our schools consolidated when we were in second grade. That's how we met. Mm-hmm. So that's our setting. South Canaan was that kind of setting. It was in the country. It was rural. The folks were farmers or had farming heritage. That was kind of the setting. So we were comfortable there. Kind of limited on what we could do there growth-wise, just based on population density, based on where the church was at, all those things. But we had a great time there. But when we moved from there to Dexter, we went from, I guess the simplest way you could put it, from a rural church to a city church type setting. Even though Dexter's not a huge town, it's 10,000 people or so. So the opportunity was there to do some more growth, and that was an opportunity for us to kind of step into that larger role. And it was a larger congregation as well. Multiple staff, that sort of thing.
And you took on your first building project,
right,
where you were there as well.
Right. There's a lot of things that happened there that gave us the opportunity to grow. So when we went to Dexter, I was 28 years old and was in seminary at Memphis at that time. So still pretty young in ministry, probably the youngest pastor they'd ever hired at that point. We were kind of growing. We'd just had our third child at that point, and so there was a lot happening in us that gave us that opportunity, that kind of fueled that growth, not just for the ministry, but for us personally, that set that up for us. A lot of that was just kind of God's timing.
Yeah.
We were in need for such a move, but I think it was a good fit for the church at that time. We were there for about 8 years. And had a lot of great ministry there, a lot of great times there.
Yeah, and even in that time, you're growing as a family. We're a family of 5, me, the oldest, then Zoe, then Caleb. But I also don't think what people might understand how tough that was on y'all is this is away from family. You don't have family when you move to Indiana. And even like when you go to Holcomb or Dexter, we're talking an hour away from your parents, but still, I mean, that's, a ways off, especially for a lot of that time. Grandpa was still working, and Grandma Janie and Papa were still doing things at that time as well. So what was it like then pastoring and going through the hardships of ministry, but also being separated from kind of your core group as well?
Right. I would say a big blessing for that when we moved from South Canaan to Dexter, the financial situation changed enough so that Kathy was able to stay home and take care of all 3 of y'all. And we were blessed to be able to do that for about 12 years. For a long time that Kathy was able to stay home. So that made a huge difference for us, for her to be able to just focus on the house and you kids and do those things, and then freed her to also to be able to be very involved in the ministry. And so not having other folks there, it made us, and you've heard me say this before, I think one of the best things that happened for our marriage is that we got married young and we moved away immediately, because it made us very close. We couldn't be dependent upon family to be there for us at every moment. And so we had to figure out a way to get through. And even once we had all of you and we're a larger family, that helped us grow very close. Not just for Kathy and I in our marriage, but our family.
Mm-hmm.
We were dependent upon one another. But obviously the church was a big help in that. There was never a time that we needed help that we didn't have it. There's lots of examples for that when we were in situations in over our heads that the church stepped up and did what maybe our parents weren't as available to do because of the distance.
And we were very blessed to have people in the church that attended grandparents' days, all of those types of things with you kids, and made it very special.
That's awesome. So to go to the other side of that, what do you think, at least let's just say in like the early years of you starting, you know, up until you get into like your mid 30s and stuff, what were some of the hardest challenges that you had to overcome in the church as a young family in ministry, solo pastoring at that?
Yeah. There were definitely some times, because I guess about our whole ministry, even in our time in Princeton, and then when we got to South Canaan, kind of the expectation on us, because we were young, is that we were going to bring about change. And
hire the young pastor, all the young people are going to come.
not yet that, but there was an expectation among the leadership that hired us that we were going to institute change and modernize the church and do that sort of thing.
Okay. What did modernize the church look like back in the 2000s? Because nowadays we kind of have a really clear idea, because we have Pinterest and we have Facebook and we have all these things of what a modern megachurch is supposed to look like. So what did it look like back then to modernize?
Well, now you're talking about, early 2000s. So what they used to term as the worship wars was still kind of echoing, especially in rural areas. There was still some of that. So modernizing meant different kind of worship, different structures in the church, how the church was being led, even things like piety within the church, so all those sorts of things. And we were in our mid-20s, so we were figuring that out for ourselves. What did we like? What did we want to do?
And you didn't exactly have like a lot of background when it comes to the modern church either, because you grew up, with hymns and that sort of stuff. I'm guessing it was similar at Grandma Jenny and Papa's church.
Praise courses.
And
her mom's job at the church was changing out the overhead projector.
Yeah.
What are those called? The clear
Transparency.
Yeah.
I remember when we were in middle school, I went to her church with a friend of mine from school, and she was on the stage changing out the transparencies on the stage. So that was a cutting edge.
Yeah.
Early 90s.
That was like the slide changer back then, like the guy on Pro Presenter. You were
you had to
pre
sit
that
on stage to do it. So for us at South Canaan, the awesome thing about the South Canaan church in our time there was there was a group there especially that was hungry for that sort of thing. So we would go from that small, country road church where everybody lived out there, was kind of farming community type folk. And I say that to say they had very little exposure to more church. And we would go there and we would drive to Memphis to go to churches that were bigger churches that were doing new things to learn. We'd go on Saturday nights, their Saturday night services that they called alternative worship services, where essentially it meant they had a band. And they did things like they had an artist that was painting while worship was going on, and had dramas that were a part of that. And we would just go experience that, to be exposed to something new.
Yeah.
And then we started a Friday night service there at that little church that was what we called an alternative worship service, where we had prayer stations and music playing on video, and we were able to experiment like that and learn what we knew how to do, what worked well, and then be able to implement those things in a bigger way.
What immediately comes to my mind is, I've experienced this in ministry too. A lot of young people do, is you get told when the church hires you on, we want change, right? Like we know what we're doing isn't working, or if the church is shrinking, we feel like we need to do something different. The problem is you get to the change, and that's when you get the pushback. It's like, we want change, but we want change that we're comfortable with, or maybe they don't even know what they want. They just know that whatever you did, they don't feel is it.
Right.
So how did you then figure that out? Like, okay, we saw this church do this. We want to try and do our version of that. But was there any time where you had pushback when you tried to implement those things?
There were some times that we did. Honestly, we've been blessed that we haven't had a lot of that. We haven't faced a lot of opposition to things that we've tried to implement in the church. Obviously, there's been times where you have folks who are just resistant to whatever change you're trying to implement, which is somewhat healthy. If you're not getting some of that, you're probably not pushing quite hard enough.
Yeah. It shows they care.
But one of the things we've always been clear about is that we didn't want to make any big changes without having a really good why first. And so one of the strategies I've always used is like when folks have that kind of opposition, then I just want to sit down and explain to them, this is why we're doing this, and help them understand the mission and vision behind it. And that's been kind of the most successful way that I've experienced with dealing with that kind of pushback.
Yeah. Do you think that's a common mistake a lot of churches make, is they make a significant change to the worship or an addition, and maybe what they're doing is they're just copying what they've seen another bigger church does, and then they're met with that opposition, and the best answer they can give is, well, this other church does it and it looks good.
Yeah. To me, when we would go, and I think exposure is very important for young leaders. You need to go see other things in other places with different leaders, and there's lots of ways to do this. But what you're looking for is inspiration, not a template. If you go looking for a template, I think you face a lot more opposition because you don't know the why. It's not your vision. It's not something that God has shaped in your heart. So go get inspired by what other people are doing, but then let God give you the vision for what your church needs to be, because it will match your church and it will be authentic to your church. And I think that's very important. And then, I mean, once God has kind of led me in a way, then I can defend that, and I can share that. I can describe it to people in a way that they can believe in it too. If I'm just copying what someone else is doing, I don't know why I don't know what God told them. And I can't say that their vision is our vision.
That's so good. So I remember there was a big change you made when we were at Risen Church. It was a significant change to the worship service. So as most of us know, if you grow up in the evangelical church, we don't say it's a liturgy like our Catholic or Orthodox friends do. We have a liturgy though, and that is we have announcements, 3 songs, a message, and a song at the end. And that's what we do. And we may change some of those elements around each other, but in the end, we expect 3 songs, sermon, altar call. And y'all made the change at Risen that you were going to do the message first and then go into musical worship. So what was the reaction like for people when you made that change? And what was the why behind that change?
Sure. Well, at that time, I was in seminary at Memphis Theological Seminary, which is a very ecumenical seminary. And so there were lots of traditions there. And so we would lead worship services there. I would lead it one week, and then a United Methodist pastor, and then an Episcopal priest would do it. And so we were a large swing between different traditions week to week on what worship looked like. So again, that exposure caused me to say, well, it doesn't have to look the way that it's always looked. Why would we worship first and then hear the word? If we believe the word is how God reveals himself to us, it made more logical sense that we would go and find God in the word, hear from him, and then in response to his word, worship. So that was the thought process behind it.
So what was the process behind implementing that? Because I think a lot of times we have ideas of how we want to change church, maybe even ideas of how to improve or add something. But what was the process that you took at that time at Risen to make such a significant change like that?
Right. So it started with leadership and the worship folks that helped lead worship there and explaining it to them. The leadership there at Risen was very open to change, and I never received much pushback from them. Again, if I could explain why I wanted to do it, what I believed was right in doing it. And so that whole process was very easy. And then the way I kind of introduced it to the church, now you're talking about, this was, what would that have been, 2004, 6, something like that? I don't know. I'm not good with years and timeline, but
It's all good.
There wasn't a lot of like disseminating information through the internet, like through Facebook and things like that. So I couldn't like shoot a video and explain it and expect everybody to see it. So I had literally write a letter explaining it. And it was like a 4-page letter that I sent to everybody in the church. And I remember people saying, I've never read a 4-page letter in my life. If you get something that long, you're not going to read it. But it was me trying to explain the reason behind this, the thought process, the theology behind it. And so we tried it. And there's something about how we're wired to worship and to really do anything, where if you've done something for so long, you're like trying to hardwire people's brains and how they react. So what would happen is we'd get up and we'd do like a short song, and then I would preach and we'd do the first song. As soon as that first song was over, people were rattling their keys. Because instinctively, the first song after the sermon was time to go home. Yeah. But what we should have been doing is just starting worship. So we tried for, I don't know, maybe 6 months to work through that and kind of change people's expectations and change that worship rhythm. But it just never took. Yeah. And it was like, well, this is causing more disruption. It's not helping worship, it's impeding worship. Yeah. And obviously that's not what we wanted to do.
So there, you're talking about like there's an instance where it didn't work out, and you have to be like, okay, let's go back. Let's go back to the way it was. How did that feel? Because I feel like for me, if I led such a significant change like that in the church, it'd almost be a hit to my ego in a way of like, and I feel like some pastors too, it'd be like, you don't want to admit defeat.
Right.
You want to push through. It's going to be like, no, this is right. Especially I feel like when there's a theological reason behind it, then we kind of justify ourselves. I can do anything. Yep. Like, it doesn't matter. This is what God wants. So what went through your mind making the decision to set maybe the ego aside and say, okay, this is what's better for the church if we go back?
One of the things that I've always tried to implement in leading the church is this attitude of experimenting. We got to try things just to see if it's better, just to see if it works. And in doing that, you have to start with that idea that it may not work, and you got to be okay with that. So before you ever do it, you have to set your pride aside. And even though you have good reasons for doing it, and even though you implement it in what you feel like was a good way, it may not work. And I can look back now and say, well, one of the reasons it didn't work because it didn't really line up well with our mission. So we were trying to develop this highly theological order of worship, yet at the same time we said we were there for the unchurched. And well, there's not, in the Bible Belt where we live, there are people who are truly unchurched. Yeah. But the majority of people have some church experience. So when they come to church, even if they're coming back to the church after a very long time, they already have a built-in rhythm.
They're expecting that liturgy.
They're expecting that same thing. Even if they haven't been there in 20 years, they have that same expectation. So it was throwing those people off too. And it made them feel uncomfortable. And it didn't feel like home. It felt like, oh, I've never experienced this before. And so all that kind of played into it. And I don't have, after we've tried something, I don't have much of a problem then saying, okay, that didn't work well. That didn't go the way I would hope that it would have. Yeah. And so we go back.
I want to circle back to what you said for a moment. You said one of the first things you did is I'm going to go talk to my leadership, which I think at Risen was a deacon board, not an elder board.
It was a deacon board and then a church board.
Deacon board, a church board, and then I'm going to go talk to the leadership team. Let me ask, what attitude, maybe not even attitude is the right word, did you go into that situation saying, this is what we're going to do, here's the why, and then it was going to happen? Or were you allowing those leadership teams to add into the process and maybe give you an opportunity to change your mind?
Right. Now, I've always brought ideas with that openness to say, okay, this is what I'm seeing. This is why I think we could do this. This is why I think it'll work. What do you think? My first question is always, does this make sense to you? Tell me what questions you have. What do you not understand about what I'm saying, to make sure that the vision I'm putting out there is very, very clear. And then the next question is, how do you feel about this? And that way, I always want that input, because I don't believe it can be, kind of goes back to our basic Baptist theology. I don't believe that the Holy Spirit only speaks to me as the pastor. He equally speaks to every member of our church. And the people who are set up as deacons and leaders, whether it be boards or elders or everything, have the exact same spirit in them. And so when I'm asking them for their input, I'm just honoring what the church has said about that person, and what I believe about the Holy Spirit in that person.
Yeah. So you're being genuine when you're asking, because I feel like so much of the time is like, what do you think? When really, like, you really have the internal attitude of, it doesn't matter what you think.
Right.
Like, this is more of me kind of just being polite, having Southern hospitality. But you were being authentic. You're saying, okay, I think we should do this, but I genuinely want your input on this.
I do. Now, let me back up then and kind of come at it the other way. There are times where I feel like certain moves are important enough that I am going to lead my leadership. So in explaining what we're going to do, I'm going to explain it in such a way that I'm bringing them along with me. So I expect for them to end up in the same place that I am. Now, when we get to that place and they don't understand or they have major questions, then that causes me to rethink maybe what I'm doing. But I feel like my leadership style is to do that.
Okay.
So I've had leaders who are really good friends of mine say, you began that meeting with giving us a new idea. At the end of that meeting, you made us feel like it was our idea to begin with. So I don't believe that's manipulation in doing that. To me, that's just good leadership. By the time we got to the end, they were as invested in the idea as I was.
Yeah. Yeah, that isn't you. Really what manipulation really looks like from a church perspective is, I think, using guilt against someone, shame, or judgment, or using your relationships to kind of pressure people into making decisions that they don't really feel.
Right.
That's manipulation.
Yeah.
Telling someone the vision and them getting so excited about it with you that they're ready to make it their own, that is good leadership, because that's them being invested in what the church is doing.
Right.
And I think we all agree churches run better when we're all on the same page of what we're doing.
I think part of that too is just being honest. I mean, I have made the mistake at times of going into meetings and asking for everybody's opinion when I didn't want everybody's opinion. Then I leave frustrated when everybody tells me their opinion. So there are certain things that I don't ask people's opinion about.
Yeah.
That as the leader of the church, we move in this direction.
Yeah.
But then there are times that I genuinely need everyone's opinion, everybody's input, because I need them fully invested.
Yeah.
So knowing the difference between that, I think is just wisdom, and knowing what your place is as a pastor. What direction we're going to move in as far as where I'm teaching, what I'm teaching the church, and what the kind of spiritual development of the church. I'm not taking a lot of input from that. There's a handful of people that I might have discussions and things about. If we're talking about major shift in mission and vision, it involves facility changes and structural changes, then that involves a lot more input, a lot more people that I want involved in that process. So it depends at what level we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, can you give me maybe a example? And obviously, we know these people. You're not going to name names, but if you give me an example of maybe a time where you went in saying, "This is what we have to do." Like you came in with a decision made. You're not really asking for thoughts or opinions on it, and there was pushback. How do those conversations work?
There haven't. I'm trying to think of many situations that have been that way, and there's not many that I can think of. There maybe been some pushback, but nothing that has ever been really an issue for us. Nothing I couldn't lead through with a few very one-on-one discussions and that sort of thing.
So that's what it comes down to, going more one-on-one instead of a board setting.
It ultimately comes down to those kind of one-on-one relationships. All right, I can give you one example, and it's not really a leadership thing, and I won't get into all the details. But there was a time when we made a decision as a church board that dealt with membership. And we had discussed it really for hours. We had prayed about it and kind of come to a decision, about were we going to accept a certain kind of situation when it dealt with membership. I won't get into the details. And so we'd made the decision. that we were gonna allow this. Okay. And made it all the way, and this is kind of the old school way of doing it. Made it all the way to the business meeting. When we got to the business meeting, one of our elder members of the board stood up and went against what the board had decided to do. And I was very frustrated. I was angry that this person who has been involved in all these discussions and was in agreement with the decision of the board went against what the board said they were going to do.
So in the meeting, they said one thing, but then when it came to the public discussion or announcement, that's when they spoke out.
They spoke out.
Okay.
So at first, I took it as an offense to me and to my leadership. I thought it was disrespectful. I had all these kind of things that were going on. Now, as I look back, and this has been over 20 years ago, okay? And I look back, and the dear saint involved in that is long gone on to be with the Lord. And I look back now and think, number one, the decision the board had made and I was a part of was the wrong decision. The board member who stood up and went against that decision was right. And it took a lot of boldness and a lot of confidence in what they were saying to do what they did. And so now I have a totally different perspective on that. And that has taught me a lot along the years, that when someone has a strong conviction against something, even if it is in the minority, I need to truly consider that. I need to take some time and think about that and make sure that things like pride and my own self kind of driven thing to please people doesn't get in the way of me doing what's right and what's true.
Well, let me swing then to another kind of end the conversation. Let's talk about like regret for a moment, like in terms of pastoral leadership. I've had such a hard time in my personal life dealing with regret, because even 5 years of ministry, I made mistakes. And, I look back some of those mistakes and I'm so frustrated at myself. Like, how could I allow myself to do that? How could I allow myself to make that decision? Or even the moments of how could I allow myself not to be bold and correct someone else who's making a bad decision? And even like this week, I'm sitting down meeting with coffee, not with someone who was a part of a church I was at, but someone who was connected in that situation in a different way. And you begin to hear some of the stuff that they heard about it. And, I'm there doing like, I wish I would have said something in that moment when I chose to kind of step back, right? And so as a pastor, how do you kind of work through those regrets that you have where you made a mistake by doing something, or maybe the moments where you didn't do anything and you should have? How do you make you better while at the same time not letting it like eat you alive?
Yeah. Regret's not a big thing that I deal with. I don't know. I'm able to let things go pretty quickly. What I've often said about regret in ministry is that I've never regretted pushing. Any regrets I've had have been not pushing. I've never regretted jumping. All my regrets have to do when I didn't jump. And so that motivates me when I feel a move to do something, that I want to do that. Because when I look back at those moments, that's what it's been. And so a lot of when I see regrets, they're more shaping to me. I don't have too many that I look at and think, well, that haunts me. And so I guess most of the things that have happened that I regret, I guess the best word, that most of them that have been redeemed because I learned the lesson.
Yeah. So you need to use that as a teaching moment.
Right.
If you use it as a teaching moment and you grow past it, then you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bitterness and true regret is a waste of emotional energy. It doesn't produce anything, doesn't get you anything. If you regret it, then the question is, why do you regret it? What can you learn from it? How can it shape you to move forward better? Then you leave it there.
Gotcha. Well, let me ask this for a moment. I want to just ask Mom a question real quick. Before we started, Mom had instructed me not to give any questions to her. I'm going to break that. So, Mom, you're standing alongside Dad, throughout his entire time in ministry. What's it been like being the wife to support Dad in a position of, even though y'all have been blessed with some great churches, part of being in ministry is dealing with criticism from people, and sometimes criticism from people who are not the most involved in the church even. Or sometimes, I think sometimes what's even harder, criticism from people who you love like family, and all of a sudden something happens. So what's it been like to support Dad through all of that?
Well, I probably haven't been the best when it comes to criticism. Anybody that would probably criticize your dad or you kids are probably just dead to me at that moment. But we've been very blessed that we were talking about this before. I can only think of two different instances that we've had to deal with that. And so we've been blessed that we haven't had to deal with a lot of that.
So what's it been for you to kind of work through that role as a pastor's wife? Because like sometimes like especially in the Baptist tradition, the pastor's wife is a very kind of set role of you smile, you shake hands, you work the room, you play the piano. Sometimes even if you're not good at playing piano, you play the piano. But what's being in that role kind of meant to you over the years? Because I know it's changed a lot too.
So I've always been a behind the scenes person, never going to play the piano, lead a class. So I'm probably not that typical pastor's wife. Actually, in my job where I work at, when people find out that I'm a pastor's wife, they're shocked. They would never see me in that way. And I don't know if that's a compliment or not. But yeah, I've led children's ministry when we've needed that. You know, I've built programs and led our church through that. I've played in special events when we needed those things. Currently, I take care of your dad. I'm not really needed in a leadership role, so I take care of him in the way that no one else can by just making sure that he's got caffeine before the service, he's got lunch to come home to. Anything like that.
Well, I'll give you more credit than probably what you're giving yourself. I mean, a lot of people, they don't see kind of the work. And I think that's one thing I've found interesting is a lot of people, they don't know what the life of a pastor is. They just think, you know, oh, he went up there, he preached, and he does some occasional funeral and a wedding, and they really don't know kind of what that life looks like. But man, when you get to live it, you get to look behind the scenes, you're like, oh my word, this is consuming. And you're like the visits and the expected office hours for some. And then there's the planning of the special events. And, you know, a lot of people, they don't see like behind the scenes, the planning that went on to stuff. And like y'all, you know, especially now at Grace United, if some of the people who are watching, y'all do a lot of themes now, like, you know, for different events that are going on and the decoration. That's not just magically like showing up on Sunday. Yeah. And there's not a lot of people stepping up, you know, on weekends or stuff either, even though I would say y'all have been greatly blessed at Grace United with the group that you have now. Yeah. But I mean, that stuff's got to get done. And so. Yeah,
Saturday night, you know, we went out with some friends for Valentine's Day and stayed out pretty late for us, 9 o'clock on Saturday night. It's late. We get home pretty early on Saturdays. But Kathy had to go up and put up a backdrop, you know, photo backdrop on Saturday night. And I was like, I don't want to go, you know, I don't want to do that. And, but what I love about that is she has high expectations and high standards for how things want to look. And so we're up there for an hour and a half after date night on Saturday night, making sure everything's good for Sunday morning. And so she puts a lot of thought, a lot of care, a lot of time into things that most people take for granted. Yeah. They just assume those things just happen.
And even like the planning, it's not just that y'all think of this all of a sudden and do it. Right. Like there's planning, there is that looking for inspiration for what other people are doing. Right. And even I think there's just a lot of like just talking through things too, like taking that personal time aside. I sat through many conversations in the back of a GMC Terrain or Town and Country minivan, just hearing those conversations about what to do and how to handle situations.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of our ministry that is like we share a common mind. So our conversations are the same conversations I have in my own head, but we share that and we go through that. And she gives me perspective and direction and correction sometimes, and so that's, you know, I couldn't do it without her. It's definitely not my ministry, it's our ministry that we do together.
Yeah. So let me kind of turn the conversation differently now. In 2014, y'all make a significant move going from Risen Church to Grace United General Baptist Church. And it was kind of a pretty shocking movie from me looking at it when I was in middle school going to freshman year. You have 3 kids. Risen Church had a parsonage. Mom got to stay at home, lived literally walking distance away from the school. Church was healthy, it was good size. They built you a few years ago like that, this wonderful office building. And you made the decision that God's calling you. I say you make the decision, but also you're accepting God's calling to now go back home to Arkansas,
right,
to a church at the time, just in terms of numbers, was smaller. Maybe didn't have the same resources as Dexter did.
right.
And you've invested 8 years in Dexter already, and now you're moving back home to there. And I think on paper, if people like looked at it just from a career like point of view, you're like, why in the world would I take this job? Like from a career point of view.
Yeah.
So what was the process then of making that kind of change like that?
Yeah. Well, typically I have 3 or 4 kind of mentors that I would run decisions by. I didn't talk to any of them about this. I knew what they would all say.
One of those moments where you're not asking for opinion.
I didn't ask for opinions because I knew what everybody would say. And they were all shocked when we made that move and wanted, what are you thinking? What's going on? So it was a kind of a big shift for us. It was different than any other move we'd ever made. In that every other move was a clear step up. That might not be the best way to say that.
I understand it, yeah.
We're moving from a smaller ministry to a larger ministry, to more opportunity, that sort of situation.
Yeah.
And this was not that. Every other time it was a very strong calling to go. Like it wasn't a decision. It was like, all right, this is what we're supposed to do. This is what we're going to do. This was not that. And the way I've explained it to people, I've never had a situation in ministry where I felt like we had so much liberty as to which God was clear. When we both talked about this then, we've talked about it a lot of times since, it was like, well, God was like, you can stay here and do ministry, or you can go there and do ministry. Which I struggled with. I prayed a lot of times, God, I want you to tell me what to do.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that.
So you almost felt like it wasn't a right or wrong thing in a sense.
It was like, I can use you here or I can use you there. And, which again, there's a lot of liberty in that, but it also meant a lot of, obviously there was going to be challenges either way. And, so we just had to pray through that. And we had to think a lot about what we wanted for you as kids. There were some things going on in your lives that were instrumental in us moving. There were things going on in our family lives, knowing the ages of our parents and things that were going to change. A lot of things played into that rather than just ministry. But we were also excited about the potential of ministering to our friends and family back home and what that would look like. And we were somewhat excited about the challenge that was there. The leadership that was there wanted a certain thing for the church. And again, it goes back to that expectation of bringing us in, what we were going to bring with us. And so all of that played into us making that decision, made that move.
It's kind of interesting. I have a lot of church planners that come on this show, and a lot of them, when they plant it, they're planning with those friends and family, right? Like they plant it and they know, like they have friends who are coming with them, family who are coming with them. Instead, you end up going to an established church with some of the people that you knew and hung out from high school, and later on, like having some family come and get involved. So it's kind of almost backwards in a way.
Yeah.
But
it's the same that the church planner friends I had back then called that home cooking. So you go in where you already have influence, you already have relationships. There's people that already know you and respect you. And so you have an immediate kind of draw that you can kind of pull on. But that doesn't last very long, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I think of a verse always from Scripture, and it comes from when Jesus went into his hometown in Nazareth,
Yeah.
and famously they try and throw him off a cliff,
Right.
and he escapes. And one verse that comes out of that is, one cannot be a prophet in his hometown. And so what were some of the challenges then, like after that, because there's always a honeymoon period in ministry
Yep.
where you're beloved, you can't do any wrong, and that finds its way out eventually. So what were then some of the struggles then of ministering in an area that used to be home to you?
The thing about that verse is that a prophet, is not accepted in his hometown. First of all, don't go to your hometown and try to be a prophet. I went in trying to care for people and love people and be authentic with people. And that was easy for us there, because this was folks, even though you're only talking about an hour and a half difference, the culture is different. You know that.
Yeah, across the Missouri-Arkansas border.
Yeah, so we were home. So we knew the language, we knew the expectations, and we knew where we needed to challenge that culture and where we needed to challenge those expectations.
Yeah.
And
what were some of those challenges then that you're like, okay, like this is something they may be not exposed to or something that's been settled in?
Yeah, often the terms we use with small church mentality.
Okay. What are those examples?
Small church mentality is that, this is my church. I know everything that's happening in the church all the time. I know what's supposed to be in this room and what's supposed to be in that room. I know what the service is supposed to do. There's an assumption that everybody in the church knows everything that's happening in the church. And that small church mentality gets in the way of growth. Yeah. And there's lots of examples of that.
Because you have to be involved in everything. Like everything has to run through everybody. Right. So therefore nothing's getting done.
It slows everything down. So, and that still rears its head. Here we're 12 years in, and every once in a while something will happen. And I'll say that's a small church mentality. There's also kind of a poverty mindset where we never have enough. Yeah. Not enough people, not enough money, not enough whatever.
I remember...
You got to overcome that very quickly.
I remember one thing. We had a clean out day one time at church. Yeah. It's something I've famously done just at about every church I've been at now. But we had a clean out day. And I remember it was a thing of like, always that question of, well, we might need that. Or we might need that in the future. I even remember the two sides of the stage at Grace United, like, are kind of storage. Right. I don't know what they're used for now, but at the time they were more storage. And you also had to walk through it to get to the baptistry. Yeah. And famously, I remember digging through this, and we found vinyl records.
Yeah.
And I remember even then...
The Bible on vinyl.
Hey JV Bible. And I remember we tried to play them at home on my vinyl record player, and we realized they were the old size of vinyl records. Yeah. And so not only was it no one using vinyl records, they were so old that even our vinyl record players could not play them, and we were throwing them away.
So and that just kind of goes back to that lack of exposure. Majority of folks there had never seen anything but what was done there. And so that took some time, not as much time as I thought it was going to. Mm-hmm. We went in with the expectation that this change was going to take a while, because we knew the history of the church and we knew a lot was happening. But God made some moves that we couldn't have made that made things move along a lot faster. And the people that were very accepting, the conversations I would have with folks would be, we can continue to have a church for you, or we can build a church for your grandkids. And we had that conversation, I don't know how many times. And the folks were, I want my grandkids and my grandkids here. I was like, well, we can build a church like that. Yeah. So, and we've seen that. We've had folks there that are 4 generations deep. Man. And that's, so that takes care of a lot of complaints. That takes care of a lot of opposition. When you're baptizing their great grandkids, then they're on board, and that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. I even remember one of the big changes y'all made, the side of Grace United, because Grace United, for people who are not familiar, it's not a big building at all. Like, I'd say it's probably, when you move from Dexter there, it's probably half the size, if not more, of that. And so with that, the facilities just, you didn't have much. You had a fellowship hall, and you had like a side that was for like Bible study and Sunday school. And you decided we're going to take out that whole education wing, and that's now going to be for our kids ministry.
Yeah, that was kind of one of the God things, the big ice storm that come through caused an ice dam and it flooded that whole area. So it had to be all redone. And so the insurance was paying to redo it. And that's when we said, okay, then we're going to redo it like this. And that was a big move for the church because we closed that side off and didn't let anybody know what we were doing. Now, they voted to turn it into a nursery. Don't get me wrong.
Kids ministry.
Kids ministry at that time. But we closed the wing off so nobody could see what it looked like.
Oh, man.
And we painted it bright, it's like green and purple and orange and bright colors and kid friendly. And then we did a big reveal. And then we outgrew it in 6 weeks.
Yeah. now people know the fellowship hall is now used for it.
Yeah. We try not to call it the fellowship hall. We call it the big room.
All right, the big room.
It's not its purpose anymore. Yeah.
That hall is still used. It's just holding all of our babies to 3-year-olds because we have that many.
And it's not big enough. We've outgrown it there too. So we're looking to change that. But we also try to use the size of the facility as an advantage for us. So obviously we changed from pews to chairs so that we can control what they call chair psychology in the room to make it feel fuller than it was when the church wasn't as big as it is now. Now we fill it up for 2 services. But that small field gives us we try to use that as an advantage. So that the phrase that we use is that we want big church excellence in a small church format. I'm messing that phrase up. I can't get the last part wrong, but we want to do things with excellence, with big church excellence, but with that kind of small church feel to it. So you're only sitting in a room with about 150, 160 people. But the lights, the production value, and everything is as big as what you would find in a church of 600 or 800. And then we do that multiple times. Now, there's limitations to that, and we've hit those limitations because you also have to have bathrooms to back that up, nursery facilities to back that up, kids' classes to back that up, and we don't have facilities for that. So now we're looking to do whatever we can to expand that.
Yeah, I've always said, it's there's problems that you have that hurt, and there's problems that you have that they still hurt, but you're like, man, I'm so blessed to have that problem. Right. And I know tons of churches right now, they would be begging to say we don't have enough space.
Right. Yeah. Facilities and space is our biggest limitation right now. Yeah. Big church excellence, small church atmosphere. That was word of it. So,
what are some ways, I guess, that small church atmosphere helps? Because, obviously it's my home. I still consider it partly my home church still. Right. I go there. Everyone still knows who I am for the most part, besides the new people that have been there since I've moved out. But I mean, you can't walk into that church and walk out without talking to probably at least 5 people. Right. It's just how it is. It's how the people are. And so what are some ways that was it intentional to continue to have that feeling and culture in there? Or is it something you kind of had to coach people on?
No, that's one of those things we had to lever. Actually, maybe we had to temper it down a little bit. And when I got there, I think we had a 10 or 15 minute greeting time in every service.
Yep.
I had to slowly shrink that down and do away with that as part of the service, but we want to hang on to that sense of hospitality.
I'm surprised no one got trampled during those times, because when it really got rocking, it was a force of people that moved through the place.
It was something. So we kind of held on to that, but now we moved it into the lobby area and out into the parking lot. So that's that sense of hospitality and warmness and feeling at home is still there. That's what we get most. The comment we get most often from people who visit and stay is that I felt at home the moment I walked in, the moment that they came in, and that's a big strength for us. We're very confident. I tell people this all the time, that we have a higher retention rate than most, which means if you invite people and they come, they're probably going to come back. And I don't say that arrogantly, and it's not because of even the worship service. It's because of the warmth and how people feel when they come in.
Absolutely.
And that's not something, honestly, that we can program. That's kind of been a part of the culture of the church that we've tried to hold on to, not get in the way of. It's not so much even growing it. It's just don't get in the way of it. Don't out-program that strength and that part of the culture that's already there.
Yeah. Because sometimes you try and force the church into being something it can't be, or it's
Right.
not meant to be.
Or you just get in the way of who we are. And that's, authenticity is a big part of our church,
Yeah.
for better or worse. Sometimes the authenticity that we have is can be kind of rough to some folks.
Yeah.
But it's, we try not to get in the way of that.
Well, if anything, the people at Grace United, they are very honest.
Right.
They are honest about everything. Shout out Brian Brown. Most honest youth pastor you will ever have. But is that a thing that you think churches, especially nowadays with, there's so many social media programs, I talk to Pastor about, there's so many things that you get hit with that's like, bring us in and we will grow your church by 50% in a year. Do you think it's a problem that churches can force system, or do you think churches can be over systemized sometimes?
I think so. I mean, we've ran through all those programs. We've done everything from connection cards to digital connection cards to follow-up systems, all sorts of things, and not had a lot of haven't helped us much. Now, part of that probably has to do with our size. So some of those things are definitely has to do with scale.
Yeah.
The more people that you're trying to retain, the bigger your systems have to be to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So the size of ours definitely helps us at that point in doing that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the best retention program you have is the quality of your hospitality and the quality of your worship service.
Yeah.
But I tell people all the time, I said, it don't matter how nice a sign you have. It doesn't matter how friendly your hospitality team is. If your worship team can't sing and they can't stay on tune, and the preaching is not engaging and people don't want to be there, they're not coming back. So there's a few things you got to focus on first and make sure that those are good. And then you worry about all those other things. But you have to do what you're good at and highlight what you're good at first.
Yeah.
And begin to work on everything else.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I wanted to go into in this time, first of all, I think if people didn't know who Grace United was and they heard you describe it as a small church and then they looked at it, they would think you're a liar. Because around here in Evansville, city of 200,000 people, your church would be considered a small to average size church. But a lot of places, especially like in rural Arkansas and Missouri, Grace United's not a small church at all. But one thing I think that's so interesting about you and your ministry is that you're not just a pastor to those people at Grace United, but you've found yourself in the years now in a role where you're a pastor to pastors. Mm-hmm. Like now I just know so many people that look to you now for your wisdom. And there's people, some of those people are pastoring churches double and triple the size of Grace United. And I think some people, I talk about with pastors on here all the time, where we attribute numbers to success in church. Right. That if I have a bigger church, then I'm more successful and therefore my teaching is more valuable or I'm wiser than you. And if you get really into church, that's not the case at all. Some people are blessed with numbers that probably shouldn't have those numbers sometimes. And there's also guys who are pastoring small churches who you're like that church, and you're like, that church is one of the healthiest places you'll ever go to. That you can't get more wise or more genuine than that person. So what's it been like for you then to be that pastor to pastors as you've gotten older and more experienced in ministry? Yeah, no, I love that. I love being able to encourage and give whatever wisdom or guidance I can to guys who come. And I don't pretend to have it all figured out. I'm still learning and figuring things out as I go as well. But I'm glad and happy to share what we've learned along the way. And there are some things I can tell guys, don't do that. Make sure this is happening in your life right now. I got to spend some time in Florida last weekend talking to some pastors and church leaders, and I love to do that. I love to be able to pour into people and to see that. One of my favorite quotes that we heard, I guess it was last year at the General Baptist Summit. And I wish I could remember the guy's name who was speaking to us in a small group. And it wasn't really a part of his talk. He was describing a guy on their team. He was a part of a church planning program or organization. And there was a guy on their board. And he said, well, this guy pastors a church of only about 200 people, where everybody else on the board pastors a church of thousands of people. Mm-hmm. He says, but this guy, most of his fruit grows on other people's trees. Mm. And I love that vision of that. Encourage guys in that. And man, if I can be one of those guys that most of the fruit of my ministry is on somebody else's trees, that would be a big blessing. Man. And do you remember maybe what the first time was where like someone sought your advice as a mentor? Because I'm guessing when that happens a lot of the time, it's not that you're asking for it, but I've had dudes. I'm gonna be honest. There's been guys who I've kind of felt as a young pastor tried to force their mentorship onto me, like they were adopting.
Yeah.
And it's not even that I don't have respect for those guys or think that they're good dudes. It's just that it's odd when someone tries to force their mentorship on to you. And I know it's not the kind of person that you are. So what was it like the first time someone sought your advice on something?
It's been odd for me. The first time I mentored someone through like them beginning ministry was at that first church in Cato, Indiana. I was 23 years old. This guy was in his mid 40s, and he wanted me to mentor him through the LAMP program. And I was like, I don't know, I felt awkward about it.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I just know your background, and I know that you're studying, and I know where you're at, and I just think I could learn a lot from you right now, and you could really motivate me. So that started really early for me. And really since that time, there hasn't been a time in my ministry where there hasn't been at least one person that I was mentoring through some type of leadership program or had someone at the church who was under me kind of coming up in ministry. Yeah. So it's been a part of my ministry, I guess, the whole time. There's always been someone like that. And sometimes in very surprising ways, sometimes in very intentional ways, where I would hire someone with the expectation that I'm training them to leave from day one. I knew that I was training them to move on. Yeah. And
that's hard because a lot of churches and just how kind of the corporate world is now, you don't want to do that. If you're having someone lead in an effective way, the last thing you want them to do is leave because then it hurts what you're trying to do.
Yeah. My mentality about that's changing somewhat because of my age. So I'll be 50 next year, so I've got plenty of time to do ministry. I feel like we're just in the prime of our ministry. But I'm thinking more about eventually I'm going to have to find someone to stay for a long time. So my thought process is changing somewhat. But I still think, the church in some way has lost that sense of sending, that we want to hold on to the best because it makes us better. Yeah. But everything we see in the Bible is that we should be sending out. We should be building up and sending out. And if we're not doing that, then we're doing something wrong.
One of my favorite lines you've ever said, and I've carried that attitude into any ministry I've been in, is you preached a sermon once about the importance of the youth of the church. This still when Grace United was pretty early on, growing. The feel was still very much kind of traditional in the room, but I think the band had just started, to grow into what it is today. And I remember you saying about the youth is this: we're not just raising up youth for our church, we're raising them up for the church, meaning the universal church. And I've always kind of thought of that because, that was in a time right before we started doing, way more in the youth program, and we were having kind of these almost monthly youth rallies in a way. And I remember there was these churches who we would invite who were General Baptist in our background, and they would refuse to come. And the reason they would come is they would say, we don't want to lose our youth to them. And you instead were setting the expectation of the church saying, we're going to lose them. And we know we're going to lose some of them. But when we do, they're going to go be leaders at another church. Right. And so I think that's such a great attitude to have.
And I got that from one of my mentors is Clint Cook. He was our executive director for a long time. And he said that often in our training. You're raising the leaders for my church, and I'm raising the leaders for your church. So you better do a good job.
Absolutely. And so what's it like being a mentor? Even, I won't go into any specifics, obviously, but you've also mentored some people through some crises as well. And even like some crises where there was a lot of eyeballs on what would happen. So how did you deal with that pressure then of, having love for someone who's going through a crisis, but also like there's been people who want to see heads roll too.
Yeah. It's, a couple of situations that I've dealt with that, where I was asked to kind of walk with someone through that or be a mentor with them through those kind of processes, is that, you have to kind of put all that public perception aside. And you have to, and I've learned this, and I have to remind myself of this constantly when I'm dealing with those kind of situations, even with kind of conflict situations in the church, is that process always has to start with forgiveness. Like whatever offense I have to what that person did, whether it was because they were in ministry and they failed, or because I know they hurt people, or I know they didn't live up to their calling. Whatever offense I feel, I have to get rid of that offense first before I can have the first conversation with them, before I can begin to deal with their issue. I can't go into it holding anything against them.
Yeah. And so what kind of attitude then do you take? Because this is one of the hardest questions I think I've dealt with in my ministry. Still haven't really figured out an answer for. When you're leading through a pastor, maybe even through like there's been a failure of leadership or there's been a moral failure of some sort, what's the process then like to say, I'm obviously going to forgive this person because that's what Jesus calls me to be. But then there's the thing of, do you recommend that they are able to go back into ministry or stay into ministry? What's kind of your thought process behind that?
Well, there's, I'm still a fan of presbyteries, which is kind of a GB thing that we got from Presbyterians early on. And the reason I like presbyteries is because it's a group of leaders who hold each other accountable.
Mm-hmm.
So in a couple instances that I've been involved in, we've had to walk with someone through that. First of all, is the person willing to walk through that process? That's a big plus for me.
Yeah.
Are you willing to sit here and talk about what you did wrong and be accountable for that and talk about how healing and confession and all that? If someone's willing to do that, I mean, that's more than what most people are willing to do.
Yeah.
So if they're willing to walk through that process, that's huge. But then having a procedure in place to do that, to know that there's going to be a time of that they're going to kind of step aside and work through this process, and they're going to be accountable to one person. And then in most of those situations, I would be a part of that deciding, has this person done everything they need to do?
Yeah. And there are situations too where I think you would gladly draw the line and say, okay, you're disqualified.
Yeah.
Like you can't go back.
If you ask Kathy or anybody who's close to me when those things come up, my initial reaction is, they're done. You blew it. I'm sorry. It's over. Because that's my initial thing. Because it is, when people abuse their positions of authority in the church, that's highly offensive to me. Because I see how much damage it has done to the church.
Yes.
That's what I mean. It has to be given forgiveness for me.
Yeah.
Because that's not my first reaction. My first reaction is, you're done.
Yeah.
So it has to begin with forgiveness for me. And then kind of, again, working through that process and find out where their heart is at.
The last thing I wanted to kind of talk to you all about as we kind of round out, I always tell people, and it's part of my testimony, it's been so weird in my ministry too, because, when you start feeling speaking, especially when you kind of are going to a lot of youth rallies like I did when I was young, a lot of people base their message around a testimony. And the testimony, is usually something that's pretty hard. I was addicted to drugs, had an abusive family, did not grow up in a Christian household. And then here I was, if I told my testimony, I'm like, yeah, everything went right. Nope, never was hungry, always had clothing, lights are always on, always in church and always involved in church. And so one of the studies that I've always found interesting, Pew Research Center says 1 in 3 pastors' kids will not be going to church after they're 18. Once they move out of mom and dad's house, they might still be a Christian. They're not going to go to church. Y'all are 3 for 3. And not only in that, but not only are we all still attending church, we're all very involved in church. I'm very involved in ministry in many different ways. Caleb, the youngest, is leading worship on Sundays. Zoe, now married to brother-in-law Fisher, who's accepted a call to ministry, and she's involved. So I guess first, what's it meant for you all to have 3 kids that are Christian, living out their faith, and serving in ministry?
You have to go first.
That's probably the greatest blessing of our lives, I would think, is getting to see you all so involved in ministry and knowing how well. It's probably our biggest brag, I would think, that we have.
Yeah.
What do you think was then some of the things that you did? Because obviously parenting's hard because it's not all on the parents if the child falls away from God or becomes what some people call a prodigal child. Because no matter what, kids have to make their decisions about their life and what they're going to do. But what were some of the things that you did when it comes to your part as parents to help make that happen?
think part of that is that we didn't compartmentalize ministry and family. Ministry was what our family did, so we did it together. You kids were often at the office around what was happening. We didn't shelter you from too much that was happening in the church. I think most of the time y'all were aware when there was tension in things that were happening, and we didn't hide a lot from you. And part of that was, I would like to say it was more intentional than it was. It probably wasn't as intentional. But I think the positive of that is not only did y'all see struggles in the church, but you saw the results of that. Like things kept going. You saw forgiveness. You saw redemption. You saw that, there were issues, but then those issues were resolved and ministry kept going. And so y'all been a part of that and seen that. And I think that was a positive thing for y'all. So that as you become adults, and even when you were younger kids, and you weren't shocked when you heard church people not act like church people, because you knew they were people.
Yeah.
You knew we were people, so that authenticity has always been a part of our family. So I think that was part of it.
Yeah. And it definitely helped that we were around some very good church people as well.
Yep.
Like, obviously people are flawed, but I can't think of really there was a time where I was like, oh, that person was really horrible. Right. And some of that maybe, I was too young to understand even some of those moments. But, we were just around so many great people that made us not resent church, not hate church people, and actually got us excited to be a part of something like that because we saw how great church could be.
Right.
And so I think the saying is always, it takes a village to raise a child, and we just a part of some really great villages and some really great people.
No doubt. Y'all were definitely raised by the church in a lot of ways, and we've been blessed by that, and I believe y'all have been blessed by that. So, and we see that in your lives because you do the same thing. Yeah.
So if you had to give some advice how you do someone who's raising a kid, and maybe they see those stats and they're very scared about raising a child with the expectations of being a pastor's kid, what's some advice you would give to those parents?
The first thing I would tell you is some advice that was given to me early on in ministry by Dr. Lau at OCU is make sure that when you're not at church, you're not bad-mouthing the church. Don't blame the church. Don't be careful the words you use. So don't say, oh, dad's got to go back to church. Or don't make it seem like the church is who's taking the parent away from the child. So you're always setting the church up as the enemy or the one who's taking the parent away. So just be careful about language and how you use it. I think that's a big thing.
And I think that even goes to people, not just pastors raising their kids, but parents raising their kids in church.
Right.
Because one of the worst things that I see sometimes is, parents, they go to church, but then they come back home and it's just full of complaints about music, pastor, whatever. And then you wonder why the kids don't want to be at church, because their parents seem like they don't want to be at church.
Right. So the words we use are very powerful, and they set up an expectation in our minds forever. And so, especially when kids are little, having that, there's a phrase that goes around the church world a lot. We get to do this.
Yeah.
But saying, understand that church is a privilege. I was hoping that the whole pandemic experience would solidify that in people's hearts. And I don't know that it has to the degree I hope that it would. Once we had so many weeks where we didn't have public gatherings and be able to go to church together as an option, that we would see how blessed we are to be able to get to do that. Yeah. But just that idea that, no, we get to do this. We get to be a part of God's kingdom. We get a front row seat to what God is doing. And that, again, that's something we always try to let you kids see. Is like, number one, the work that it takes to go into it. Yeah. But then, but this is what happens. Yeah. This is what happens when we do that.
And a lot of those times we were kind of right there with you setting up those events. Like I think an example I always tell people is, when I was 8 years old, I was, the scripture says, to pick up your cross.
Yeah.
And I was quite literally picking up a full-size cross and dragging it across the parking lot after Good Friday service.
Yeah.
And then, there's always the picking up the chairs. And,
Right.
I think I tell people I've done I've done every job at church aside from leading worship. Thank goodness. I think I've done everything else. I've been the usher and the slide person, the sound guy, the camera guy. Camera guy being the first ever, position, servant position. And it's kind of, me and Zoe and Caleb, we all got to experience that in different ways. And Zoe leading kids and doing slides. And
one of my favorite examples of that is that Zoe and Fisher, the church they were serving at in Conway, were helping at VBS. And they had a group of kids at VBS that was just staff members' kids. So one of the classes that Zoe and Fisher taught the staff members' kids was how to properly stack chairs and fold tables.
That's an important lesson. Is it called Pastor's Kid, like 101?
I don't remember what they called it. I thought that was great.
She's a pro.
Yeah, she's a pro.